Hey, how's it going, YouTube? My name is Jason Wozniak, and today I want to show you guys how to take your unloved calculator and your dusty old Game Boy and make them into something beautiful. Now, before I show you guys what this is, or tell you guys more about it, I want to give credit to a YouTuber named ZeldaXPro who actually gave me the idea for the whole thing. So, without further ado, what is this thing and how did I make it? Well, this is basically a GameBoy Advanced SP inside of the casing of a TI-83 calculator. And I was able to make this by taking the calculator and gutting the inside, so basically like hollowing out the shell and removing all the unnecessary things. And then I was able to take apart my GameBoy Advanced SP and put the electronic components inside of the casing of the calculator, rewire everything, seal it up, and basically get it something like this. So yeah, hopefully in this video I'll be able to show you how to make your very own. So without further ado, let's go to step one and see what you need. You'll need a TI-83 Plus calculator. I recommend getting one from eBay. That's broken, so because you're going to be tearing it apart anyway. You're also going to need a Game Boy Advance SP. You're going to need some screwdrivers, a Phillips head, a tri-wing, and one that has a special security bit so that you can open up the calculator. You can buy like a set of security bits online for pretty cheap. Also some epoxy and some super glue, some wire, some thicker wire, and this thinner wire. You're gonna need a lot of thinner wire. You can get this at your local electronics store. You don't have to be pretty thin. You'll need a soldering iron, a desoldering tool, a Dremel tool, some solder, wire cutters that can strip wire too, and for the components you'll need these male and female port connectors so that you can relocate the charging port. Also a small switch so that you can relocate the power switch, and a small 10K volume potentiometer so that you can relocate the volume wheel. Okay, that's pretty much it. That's all you need. Okay, so the first part in building this thing is just to take everything apart. So what we need to do is take apart the Game Boy and the calculator. Now this step's pretty simple. I'm just gonna speed through it. I'll show you guys on the camera. So and if there's anything important I think you should know, I'll let you know. But yeah, for the most part, it's pretty simple. Take apart the Game Boy, take apart the calculator. That's it. Okay, so now that we've taken everything apart and we've salvaged what we need, the next step is to cut up the case of the calculator so that we can fit everything from the Game Boy inside of the calculator. And that includes the cartridges, and the just all the components and everything in there. So basically you're gonna take the back, we're gonna work on the back of the calculator first, and it's gonna go looking from something like this. And as you can see, like there's a lot of the, you know, battery stuff in here and all this backing. We're gonna go from something like this to something more like this. So yeah, I'll show you guys everything that you need to do. A lot of this is going to be with the Dremel tool, so we're going to be doing a lot of cutting. So make sure you got like your safety glasses on. So yeah, alright, let's get to it. Alright, so now I'm just gonna put some super glue around the edges, and then put this battery case in place so I can just finish cutting off the rest of this stuff. Okay, so the case is pretty much done, as you can see. If we test it out, it needs to be a little wider, but I mean, for the most part, this is good. I'm gonna finish up a little more, but yeah, that's the basic gist of the case. Now, the front of the case is a little more simple. There's not as much as we have to do. All we really have to worry about right now is getting the screen to fit in there. And we're not going to have to modify the screen at all. It may seem like it, but we're not going to. What we're going to do is we're going to just cut off these screw posts right here. And to make it easier for us, we're going to glue down these 5 faceplate buttons right here. So I'm just going to put some hot glue down there, and then we can start cutting. Okay, so after the buttons are glued down, the next thing you're going to want to do is slim down this entire area over here. You're going to want to cut off like a lot of the extra plastic that's like raised above here, and you're going to want to make it as flat as possible so that you can fit the screen in here. Now, additionally, after you get this all flat and you kind of remove all the stuff besides the 2 screw posts up here, what you're going to want to do is take this part, and we're gonna have to cut it along here somewhere so that the screen will fit. So you're gonna make a small cut, maybe like a few centimeters, so that when you lay the screen down flat, this part doesn't interfere. So yeah. Okay, so now that we're pretty much finished with the case, the next challenge is going to be relocating everything. Now, we can't just leave the buttons where they are on the Game Boy Advance SP, or anything really. We're gonna have to relocate the volume wheel, the speaker, the power switch, the charging port, the battery, and the buttons. So basically what that means is, instead of having the buttons flat against the case like they are now, we're gonna have to use wires to kind of like extend those off of the case to put them where we want, kind of like an extension cord. So we're gonna have to rewire all those things to where we want. And that, we're gonna start with the buttons. So we're gonna have one wire for each, we're gonna have two wires for each button. One is for the signal, and the other one is for the ground. And if you don't understand what that means, it's not important, but we're basically going to have to reconnect the buttons from the Game Boy Advance SP onto the board of the calculator so we can have those buttons functioning. And you can put those anywhere you want. There's a certain layout that I think is the best, and I'll show you guys on there, but yeah, that's basically the next step. And yeah, so let's get to it. So before we relocate these buttons, it's important to understand how exactly this works. So what happens when you press a button on the Game Boy Advance is a connection is made between the data point and the ground. And what we're doing is we're finding all the data points for every button, and there's a diagram for that in the description that you are going to need to follow. But basically you're going to connect the data point for the button you want and another wire to a ground point on the Game Boy Advance SP, and you're going to relocate it onto this board on the calculator. And each point you wire one side for data and one side for ground, and then when you connect it with the conductive material on the back, so when you press down like that, the conductive material on the back makes that connection, and it signals to the Game Boy Advance that the button has been pressed. Now, that's really all you need to understand it, but before you guys start wiring, before we start, there's 4 things that I want you guys to know. First is the wire length. You want to make sure that the wires are long enough so that if you need to open the system back up to repair something, that you can. It's also not a bad idea to pair these things up and label them so that you know which wires go to what button. These wires are about 7 inches in length. The second has to do with the ground connections. So because all of the buttons share a common ground, what we can do is, rather than having the ground connections going to a bunch of spots on the Game Boy Advance SP, we can have one ground connection from the Game Boy Advance SP leading to a piece of perf board, and then from that piece of perf board we can connect all the ground connections from the calculator to this piece of perf board, so that all of our ground is in one easy to find spot. So the third thing you'll want to do is you're going to want to find all of the traces on the board close to the buttons, and the traces are these little lines, and you're going to want to sever those, because those traces connect different points between the buttons, and there's so many of them that it's just easier just to cut them all to prevent any interference that they may have when we're trying to relocate the buttons. And lastly, I would recommend drilling some holes wherever you plan on putting buttons so that you can put the wires through them. This will make things more compact and give you more space to fit everything in there. Okay, so everything's pretty much wired up. I was just over here testing it, and if I zoom into the screen here, you can see that everything is working as it should. Yep, start, select, A, B, left, right. Alright, looks good. We can move on to the next step. Okay, so we're very close to being done. The last few things we need to do are relocate the other things like the volume wheel, the power switch, the charging port, and the battery. And we need to make a few case modifications to fit those things. And on top of that, we have to remove a few ports from the GameBoy Advanced SP to make a little more room. And actually there's one more thing, and that's we have to make screw posts to hold the GameBoy Advance SP inside of the case of the calculator. But after that, we should be done, I think. So, almost there. Almost there. Okay, so on the GameBoy Advance SP, we're going to have to remove some of these ports. And you don't have to worry about keeping any of them besides the charging port. All the other ones you can just toss. And to remove these, you're going to have to use a desoldering tool. Or you can just kind of heat up your solder gun and kind of scrape them off. But what you're going to remove is the power switch, the battery connector, the right trigger, the left trigger, the volume wheel, the external port, and then the charging port. But make sure to keep this charging port right here because we're going to need that later. So yeah, that's it. Just remove all those ports and then we can move on to the next step. One thing I forgot to add is don't remove the power switch port, which would be right here. As you can see, I removed it, but I'm going to be putting it back, so just be sure to not remove that. Just keep that there. Okay, so now that we have all those ports removed, the next step is going to be adding screw posts to the case so that we can secure the Game Boy Advance in place. And this is necessary because when the Game Boy Advance is in here, we're going to be sliding games in and out, and that's gonna and then unless we have some support for that, this is just going to move around all inside, and we don't want that. So what you can do is you can find some screw posts from an old electronic that you had, so maybe like an old toy or a VCR or an old home phone, and you can just cut those off and use the screws in the screw posts. And what you're going to do is you're going to position it in a way so that you're going to want to put a game in there so that it looks about right, and then once you find that spot, you're going to identify where the screw posts are, and then you're going to use the epoxy that we have and put that in place so that you can secure that down. And afterwards, what that's going to look like is something like this. So as you can see, I added some screw posts in, 4 of them to be exact, here, 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 and here. So yeah, that's the next step. So I'm not going to show you guys how to wire this stuff in detail, all these ports, because there's a link in the description that pretty much shows you how to do all that in detail, and I'm not going to go over that in this video. But what I will go over is exactly where I put these and how I made them into the case. So for the first thing is the power switch, and basically I took a tack switch, just a small switch that I got from Radio Shack, and I attached it to a small piece of perf board. And what I'm going to do is I cut out a space right here, and I'm going to fit it in there so that the switch fits in that little headphone jack roundish slot in the Game Boy, in the calculator I mean, so that you'll be able to, you know, switch it back and forth and stuff. And that is going to end up looking something like this, where as you can see, I cut out a little slot in there, and now, you know, the switch is just right here so that I can turn it on and off just like that. And also additionally, I put the volume wheel right here, and I was able to cut out a little slot in the case to make room for that, as well as with this charging port. So you can obviously, you could put these anywhere you want, but these are the spots that I found work the best. So yeah, you can wire those up and fit those in and hold them down with epoxy once you know they work. And after that, I think that's pretty much it. So there's one more thing I wanted to explain, and that's how to charge this thing. Now this all looks very complicated, but it's actually very simple and only involves 2 connections. So if you look back to where the charging port used to be, there's a bunch of pads, or these with solder on them. So what you're gonna do is connect 2 wires. The first is positive and the second is ground. So for the positive, where the voltage comes in, is gonna be the 2nd pin. And then for the ground, it's going to be the 6th pin. And then these are going to come back to the charging port that we had originally, and you're going to connect those as such. And then you'll have the other port that will connect in, and then you'll have wires coming back to the charging port. Now I use the original charger, and this just fell off, but you're going to connect the positive and the ground to the corresponding pads on the port from where they would be on the board, and that would be 2 and 6. Now this fell off. I was going to show you that it was charging, but you could just hopefully take my word for it. And yeah, that's it. So I'm going to epoxy all this stuff in, make sure it's all held and everything works, and close it up. And that's it. Should be done. Okay, this is the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this as much as I did making this thing. Yeah, just close it up. Everything's working perfectly. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and post them below. Yeah, thanks for watching. I'm gonna play myself some Pokemon, and hope you have a good one.